Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this, the Clown Decade. The decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And luckily we are just simply going through yet another video today. This time it is Otto English, talking about Winston Churchill. Now, just as a quick background to Otto English, the man is an idiot. I have made a video called Otto English is an Idiot. You can go and watch that video if you want. In fact, I think I'd go as far as actually recommending it, because I go through a few bits and pieces about his first book, Fake History, 10 Great Lies and How They Shaped the World, because it is a book that effectively historians have told people to completely avoid, because it's so stupid, including stupid things said like Adolf Hitler wasn't actually a failed artist, only for Otto English to write how Adolf Hitler did not get into art school, which in most people's minds means that he is a failed artist. And he also thought that Genghis Khan was his full name, not that his name was Genghis and he held the title of Khan, which is just king of the Mongol horde, basically. But if you don't know who Otto English is, he's an idiot that doesn't understand history, and he is a progressive activist who just decides to lie about people all the time. He's also a humorless bore, by the way, who thinks that you need to be sad about absolutely everything that came before us, and only be happy about things that are changing the things that came before us. Some great examples from Twitter, and this is just from the past week, by the way, include him quote tweeting a perfectly innocent video of someone having footage that has been remastered and coloured from 1901 of the Morecambe Promenade. And Otto English obviously can't let things like this lie, can't have people say, oh, didn't things look clean and lovely back then, because it's full of white people. And he says life expectancy is 50, women can't vote and neither can 40% of men, as if that's a bad thing. Poverty is rife, thousands die unnecessarily in absence of vaccines and universal health care, no old age pension, and all those boys just 13 years later would have been sent to the Western Front. As if any of that is relevant to people saying, oh, doesn't it look nice? As if you can't have places looking nice and also have people living beyond an average years of 50, though, again, that's mainly brought down by high child mortality rates, which, again, these are all things that we've improved. I don't see why it has to be a zero-sum game. Why can't we have nice, clean promenades and streets and also not have a lot of children dying at birth? And also, people did have a pension if they saved for it, and that's going to be the same thing for my generation, so I don't know why he's trying to point that one out. But also, just yesterday, just to prove that he is even more of a humorless bore than I thought he ever could be, an account called Evil Leslie Knope, which is in the Britosphere, I suppose you could say, was criticising the Erasmus scheme, which is effectively the government pays you to go on a holiday to Europe to try and expand your mind. And Evil Leslie Knope actually went on Erasmus and thought it was just a complete waste of money. And in criticising it, obviously he got a lot of pushback. So he put the classic meme of to learn who rules over you, simply find out who you're not allowed to criticise with Erasmus. This is a completely common meme format, and pretty much every time it's posted, there's always someone that does what Otto English does. Which is to say, perhaps if you'd had an Erasmus scheme, you might have learned to fact-check quotes. The irony being that he did go on an Erasmus scheme, and it's just a meme. Nobody cares if it is misquoted, it is a meme. It is supposed to be funny. But it is one that is not of Voltaire, but of Kevin Alfred Strom, who was an American neo-Nazi. Again, Otto, people either know this or don't care. It is a meme. It's not like people are actually attributing that quote to Voltaire. I know you haven't been on the internet for 5 minutes. I know you know what memes are. Anyway, as you can tell from the screenshot, Evil Leslie Knope blocked him because, I'll be honest with you, if I started getting a load of replies from Otto English's fanboys, I'd probably block him too. Unfortunately, I'm on the other end of a block because I told Otto English that illegible and unintelligible effectively mean the same thing. Because, you know, they do. But this is the type of pedantic tit that Otto English is, and it truly does make him a completely humorless bore, who is effectively the type of guy that watches QI and thinks that his actual IQ has gone up by 10 points, when realistically even QI have had to come out and say, actually, as time goes on, most of the facts we actually put forward in QI tend to actually get debunked. In other words, QI themselves, and this was quite an early season, this was like season 7 or something, basically had to admit that QI over time actually does make you stupider. And the same thing tends to happen with just being in the vicinity of Otto English, so I am risking my IQ for this video, so you better be happy about that. Anyway, on to the TEDx talk. So, Otto English is hosting a TEDx talk called The Fake Mythology About Winston Churchill and Dunkirk. And so, I mean, obviously, you know from the title, we are going to be talking a lot about the legacy of Winston Churchill and, for some reason, Dunkirk. And I just find something really funny about using the term fake mythology. The insinuation of mythology is that it is fake, or at the very most charitable, that some parts of some person's story have either been omitted, exaggerated, or obfuscated. This just typically happens with historical figures that do end up becoming national treasures. Sir Francis Drake, for example, yes, the man did trade slaves, but Otto English would probably just leave it at that. The thing is, when you actually look further into Sir Francis Drake's life, he raided Portuguese and Spanish ships, and yes, the first few times he did trade the slaves, that is true. People that were already slaves. I'm not defending his actions here, by the way. Obviously, slavery is wrong by our current Monday morals. They weren't back then, so I don't really care. But the time where he was involved in the slave trade was in his 20s, and he wasn't even captain of the ship. When he was captain of the ship, and he did raid Spanish ships with slaves on, you know, he kept one on as a first mate and freed him. In fact, I'm pretty sure he freed most slaves and just sent them to Panama. Point being is that throughout his life, generally, he actually avoided the slave trade pretty well. But you get someone like Otto English and he'd say, oh, he was involved in the slave trade, therefore he was evil, when he's one of the greatest Britons to ever have lived. Like, that's an example of kind of a mythologising of a historical figure. You don't even have to lie that much about it, and really whether they're evil or not entirely depends upon whether you just focus on the bad that they did in their life, which I have no doubt is what Otto English is going to do here. But on a note about TEDx talks, they're basically a facade to make what you are talking about look like it is in any way well researched or in any way informative. All you actually need to do to have a TEDx talk is have TED accept your application. And all they do is that they will look to make sure that all prospective organisers understand the spirit, structure and scope of a TEDx event. When we review your application, we look at the community you would like the event to serve, the intention and motivation around organising an event, and the type of content you would like to feature. In other words, the application was probably, we're going to tell the truth about Winston Churchill or something like that, to a community that I'm a part of, i.e. somewhere in Manchester, I think it is, which apparently, I don't think Otto English even lives there or even lives anywhere near the north, but whatever, it doesn't matter, it's in Britain. And they've just accepted it. Well, the thing is that TEDx also accepted this.
Guys, what's the one problem right now that's not going to be around in 2070? The elderly and the disabled. Because we're just going to kill them.
Yeah, in other words, just having a TEDx talk basically doesn't mean anything. All it really means is that you're able to book out an event hall and write a speech. That's all it really means. And then TEDx will sponsor it a bit and cover some of the costs for it. That's all it means. And then, of course, actual TED Talks have had issues with leftists in the past, such as Aaron Banks suing Carol Cadwallader, the famous Guardian journalist, for libel, for just lying about him in the middle of a TED Talk. So, yeah, TED Talks are a bit of a meme. And allowing Otto English to do a TEDx talk doesn't really help people not think it's a meme. Anyway, we're here to see what Otto English has to say about Churchill, so I suppose I'll let him take it away.
No event in recent British history resonates quite so strongly in the collective British mind as the Second World War.
I'm not going to lie, I have never heard Otto English speak. I've only ever seen him through the media of his writing in articles and his time on Twitter. And I am not shocked that this is the way he talks in a speech. It's almost like when you put into an AI video maker, I want a smug, upper middle class English bloke to talk down to other British people. This is exactly the type of mannerisms that I would expect, and it's really not helping me with getting rid of the idea of stereotypes.
It's everywhere. And that's unsurprising.
What are you saying? I mean, I cut out the bits where he gave examples of where it is, because it's everywhere. If it's everywhere, you don't need to give examples. It's everywhere. You don't need to give specifics when you say everywhere. Because, yeah, it is everywhere, you're right. And it is unsurprising, yes. I don't know where he's going with this. Nobody is surprised. This is why I made this meme earlier today. This is why I made this meme for this video, in fact. This is Otto English's whole life. His entire time on Twitter, his entire time writing for the Byline Times or whatever, his entire activism is pointing out the obvious and pretending he is the only person that is seeing this obviousness. And I get the feeling this is what this entire speech is going to be about. And it is already excruciating. Anyway, carry on.
I mean, of course it is. It seems ridiculous to say that the Second World War was a big event.
He then goes through some numbers about how it was terrible and how so many people died. I'm skipping all that. This is the most useless introduction I think I've ever seen in my life. This would be like me introducing a video and saying English is the language of the English. And you see it everywhere in Britain. It's everywhere, and that's unsurprising. You know, you see it in Manchester, you see it in London, you see it in Glasgow. It's everywhere, and it's not surprising. And it's something we use to communicate, like in talking, like in books. Going on like that, it's the ultimate midwittery. He is the perfect example of a midwit. Someone who just has a completely average IQ, is able to think somewhat abstractly, and thinks they're the only person that can think abstractly. And because of that, it's some weird Dunning-Kruger effect. They then think that they have this esoteric knowledge and ability to discern that other people can't, because they think they're so much smarter than them. But all Otto English is doing here is wasting time. This is like padding out his video essay with completely useless facts and information. You know, if he made this as a video essay on YouTube, he'd probably be putting up in big letters the words he's saying at the moment, like the big number of the amount dead in World War II and having a map of World War II Germany or something like that. Just completely useless information. It's a complete time waste, and instead of saving you time, I've just decided to whinge about it instead. So let's actually get to the time-saving part now.
And something else happened. We won. We were on the winning side in the defeat of the most horrific, egregious dictatorship that strutted the stage of the 20th century. And that is something that our recent ancestors, and indeed us, should be awfully proud of.
That was effectively 25 seconds of Otto English trying to extend the sentence of "We won World War II, beat an evil dictatorship, and that is a good thing." I mean, me of all people, I do not care if a video or speech is long. I am happy to listen to, say, Jordan Peterson's talk for 2 hours, or, you know, the amount of times that I have listened to Mauler's The Last Jedi review, which takes up a total of about 5.5 hours. I'm happy to listen all the way through that, and I will pick up information from it. Listening to Otto English is exactly where people who complain about long man bad should be pointing to. This entire speech is about 10 minutes, and he's already wasted a whole minute basically saying nothing. For some reason assuming that the audience is full of completely dim and completely uneducated people that don't know World War II happened. And that is nothing short of insulting.
But you would think that given that this is so important, we would be getting the key parts of it right.
Oh, good Lord, where are we going to go with this?
And in fact, quite often, and sometimes quite deliberately, that's not happening.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it!
So let's start with Winston Churchill.
Absolutely great man. Absolute hero in World War II. What have you got to say about him?
Everybody knows Winston. And if you ever walk through Parliament Square, you can't help but be reminded of him. His 4-metre-high effigy looms over the surrounding area.
Jiminy cricket, Otto. If we're going to be talking about getting the basic facts right about World War II and effectively not mythologising, or let's face it, not exaggerating Churchill's part and what Churchill was like as a person during World War II and after, you have to make sure that every detail you put in this speech is perfect. Meticulously go through it to make sure you don't exaggerate a thing if you're going to be this pedantic. And since you're getting up on your high horses of pedantism, I am going to have to be pedantic too. This is what he is saying looms over Parliament Square. You can't even see the statue very well in this picture. Churchill's statue is behind the tree in kind of the centre left of the picture. I'm having to kind of describe where Churchill is because I should be able to say it's that looming thing over Parliament Square, where, as you can see, the thing that looms over Parliament Square is Elizabeth Tower, where Big Ben resides. And as you can see, Churchill is a statue there with a bunch of other 4-metre-high statues of people I don't even know who they are. I've not been to Parliament Square for some time, but I do know that in Parliament Square there's a whole bunch of statues. I know there's one of Gandhi. I know there is one of, I believe, Millicent Fawcett, the famous suffragist, and many other people. And yes, Churchill's is one of the bigger ones. To say it's kind of the centrepiece of Parliament Square, though, just from this picture alone, Otto, I can just tell people that you're lying. So well done. The first fact that you bring out about Churchill, and it's a lie. It doesn't bode well for the rest of this speech, I'm going to be honest with you.
His shadow cast both literally and metaphorically across Westminster.
I completely appreciate I'm getting hung up on this one detail of his speech, but seriously, if we're going to talk about mythologising Churchill in a bad way, let's not then mythologise him in the complete opposite way. You know what I mean? His shadow looms over Parliament Square. His statue is the same size of David Lloyd George's here, who was yet another Prime Minister, I believe, who came about in the interwar period. And according to the statue makers of Parliament Square, they should be put on pretty much equal footing. So no, in a literal sense, no, his shadow does not cast over Parliament Square. That happens from the multitude of statues that are already there. Including people who aren't even English, like Nelson Mandela and, Gandhi, as I already mentioned. It's just crazy that Otto is willing to lie this obviously to all of us, but this is why I called him an idiot, and still do.
A day, a week, an hour can't go by without some politician or pundit or think tank evoking his memory.
I'm not going to lie, I spend a lot of time listening to politicians. I spend a lot of time, looking at what think tanks have to say, being on Twitter. Winston Churchill is not someone who comes up every hour. Every day, even I think, is a push. Once a week, even that, I can't even recall the last time he was invoked. And don't get me wrong, I do believe that World War II and Churchill, by association, is the forging myth of the modern British world, and I think it's been forged in completely the wrong way. And I do think trying to question the mythology of World War II is sensible in some regards. I don't think it's worth completely deconstructing to make it completely useless. I think that's stupid and not going to work out. However, that's what Otto English is trying to do. He's trying to completely tarnish the name of Churchill. But he's trying to do it in a woke and cool way, which I guess makes him a bit different to the dork rightists who are trying to do it in a cringe way by effectively saying Hitler did nothing wrong. And I, have the receipts of people actually saying that, so, that is not an exaggeration. But when Otto English does it, he's cool, probably because he's trying to say that it was the Soviets that actually did everything in World War II as well. But anyway, again, just a completely useless exaggeration by Otto English, and again, it's not really doing wonders for his whole I actually look at history in the modern day perfectly objectively, thank you very much.
And one recent Prime Minister even seemed to base his entire political career on a sort of elaborate cosplay of Winston.
I'm really confused as to what he means by that. Do you think Rishi Sunak tried to be like Winston Churchill? If you mean Boris Johnson, I'll accept that, but you didn't say that. You said the Prime Minister. And this TED Talk was done in 2024, so there can't even be a confusion as to whether he meant Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He seemed to mean Rishi Sunak. I am so confused I'm perplexed by this speech. I didn't think this speech was going to be this bad, by the way. I thought he'd actually put better effort into his speech, but apparently no. He's basically written a speech like a very, very long Twitter thread. And that is actually humiliating, by the way, Otto. You should be embarrassed by this so far.
We all know Winston. Close your eyes and you can...
Right, I'm skipping this bit. I don't know what he's talking about here. Oh, just close your eyes and you can imagine... I don't... What is your point? I'll use the Monty Python bit again.
Get on with it!
Courtesy of the internet, we can learn all of the other witty, incisive things he said. Stuff like, if you're going through hell, keep going.
I just had to put that mannerism in. I just found it so funny. It feels so fake. But again, I don't know what his point is here. Unless his point is that we've mythologized Winston Churchill and he never did all these examples that he said and that he never actually said these quotes, which I would not be shocked if some quotes have been misattributed to him, sure. But that's even happening with modern day public figures. You know, it's like the meme before. I know you've never said the physical words Churchill did some bad things, but I have no doubt in my mind that this TED Talk is going to be about how Hitler, of course Hitler did bad things, that Churchill did some bad things. And so I'm not surprised that Churchill has had things attributed to him that it sounds like he may have said. Like, is that going to be your point? It's 3 minutes into this 13-minute speech, by the way. I couldn't tell you what he's got to say. So far, what I think his point is are just completely educated guesses.
It was Churchill who observed that if you're not a liberal by 25, you don't have a heart. And if you're not a conservative by 35, you don't have a brain.
I know for a fact that is a quote that is misattributed to... I nearly said Hitler again. Churchill. I know that is misattributed to Churchill. In fact, the source I have here says that there is no record of anyone hearing Churchill say this. Paul Addison of Edinburgh University made the comment that surely Churchill can't have used those words attributed to him. He'd been a conservative at 15 and was actually a liberal at 35. And would he have talked so disrespectfully of Clemmy, who is generally thought to have been a lifelong liberal? Yeah, as far as I was aware, Churchill never said this, and to be fair, Otto English might say these are all actually misattributed quotes, and fair enough, but I don't know, I guess I'd have said that already. I mean, I've already skipped out about 2 other quotes, by the way. This feels like a very laboured point. Basically, I think that you need longer than 5 minutes to actually make the point that Churchill's legacy is complete mythology. But he's wasting a lot of time on this. Also, on another point, it is my actual opinion that this quote is a bit of a psyop, and effectively, people say this to try and keep people as liberal, to try and tell them that you're actually heartless if you're not a liberal anymore. And this is also why I think it's misattributed to Churchill. I don't think Churchill would admit that being a conservative means that you have no heart, because that is the underlying implication of that quote. So, yeah, total garbage, total psyop.
As proof of his sort of international reputation, when Ron DeSantis recently quit the American presidential race, he fell back on Winston's words with a line, "Never believe anything you read on the internet." No, he didn't. But he should have done, because everything I've just said is bunkum.
Yeah, so I was right. I don't know why he had to go through about 5 quotes to get to that point, but yeah, he's done exactly what I thought, which was quotes have been misattributed to Churchill. I mean, yeah, the same thing has happened with pretty much every historical figure. What's your point?
The line about if you're not a liberal by 25, you don't have a heart, and if you're not a conservative by 35, you don't have a brain, that's utterly ridiculous, because Winston Churchill was a conservative at 25 and a liberal at 35.
Well, at least I can see that Otto English's Googling skills are about as good as mine, so he should have absolutely no reason to have lied in the first place about that Churchill statue looming over Parliament Square. I don't know why he lied about that.
But it doesn't really matter, because those quotes are all made up. And you might think, so what? Why is this guy wasting his time worrying about fake quotes on the internet.
I mean, quite literally, yes. I mean, I don't like the liberal and conservative one, because as I say, I think it's a psyop, but every other quote was either a joke or it was giving words of encouragement that you'd say to soldiers, let's say. Both of which are quite famous aspects of Winston Churchill's speeches and, well, his humour. So as I say, it's not shocking that encouraging words and witty ripostes are attributed to Churchill when they're not his. I mean, fine, yes, let's establish whether he actually said it or not, but this isn't worth a TEDx talk.
The problem is that fake Churchill quotes sit at the tip of the iceberg of fake Churchill mythology.
Again, absolutely hilarious that he uses the words fake mythology. I mean, again, Otto, I know you've got the same Googling skills as me. I just Googled myth, and the definition literally comes up with widely held but false belief or idea. You don't need to say false mythology. Mythology is inherently false.
And this huge cottage industry is something which I think Winston himself would have been rather pleased about.
I mean, I'm not going to lie, I too want to kind of be in a position in my life at some point where people start mythologizing me. I suppose it already happens with AA's lot. The amount of lies that are told about me there is quite funny. But I actually want to be mythologized by people that I actually have respect for. You know, I think everyone in their mind does want to be seen as good by other people, and that really has been the case if you do end up being mythologized during and even after your death. Now, how exactly I'm going to do that, I have no idea, and in all likelihood, it's going to fail, but, you know, I'd still like it. But this is the thing, Otto English is trying to make out that that's a bad thing, whether it's due to big-headedness or a big ego or narcissism, as he may put it. I don't know, but I don't think it's a bad thing to want to be remembered so fondly that people literally mythologize you. Because again, that is typically what happens with some of history's biggest influences. Even a lot of your heroes, Otto English, will be mythologized. There is no way that Martin Luther King is not mythologized at this point. And I know for a fact that someone like John Lennon is. John Lennon was a total and complete evil man. Basically disowned his own son and called him the accident at the bottom of a whiskey bottle. That man had nothing but spite in him. And he had the audacity to make the song Imagine.
Because nobody put in the hours in forging the fake Churchill myth quite like Winston himself.
Good Lord, where is this going?
In fact, that 4-metre high statue in Parliament Square, he chose the spot where it would go. It's extremely prominent. And as a result, successive generations of politicians have been obliged to walk past Winston every day on their way to work. Now that has a deep psychological imprint on people.
I mean, yes, it is true. Winston Churchill, when told in the 50s that Parliament is going to be redeveloped, he did draw a circle in the northeast corner of Parliament Square and said, that's where my statue will go. And his statue was erected and unveiled in 1973, which was 8 years after his death. And this is such a disingenuous framing from Otto English. The man was the Prime Minister in the war. Of course he's going to expect a statue. He is a man of history. He knows that we make statues of our leaders in great times like that. Of course we do. He knew he was getting one. But one thing that for some reason he misses out on is that it's like, oh, this was all Winston Churchill. No one really wanted it. I went to the original Times article that goes through the story of it being erected, and there were 4,500 individuals and organisations that contributed more than £32,000 for the statue, and all of that money was deposited in the Library of Chartwell on November 30th of that year, so Winston's birthday. Like, this wasn't Churchill constructing his own mythology. He was mythologised by everybody in Britain already, as we typically would do for our leaders in a war. And this isn't even Churchill ascribing quotes to himself that he never said. This is completely different to stupid people on the internet doing that, Mr. English. Again, my main thesis throughout all this is that Otto English is an idiot. And not only is he an idiot, he is a disingenuous idiot. And just for context, by the way, £32,000 in 1973 is equivalent of about £333,000 today. So it was an awful lot of money. And again, just under 5,000 individuals and organisations donating towards this. Yeah, this isn't the case of Winston Churchill creating his own mythology. This is Winston Churchill riding on the wave of his own constructed mythology, which I have absolutely no problem with. Anyway, carry on.
Churchill also got in first on the history. He wrote a famous 6-volume account of World War II, which put this guy called Winston Churchill centre stage in all of the action, getting all the calls right in the Second World War.
I don't know why he doesn't name the book series, but it's called Triumph from Tragedy. And again, unbelievable disingenuity from Otto English here, but Winston Churchill prefaces his own book, which, by the way, Winston Churchill was a war journalist in World War One, so he has experience about writing about war, but he literally says this volume concludes my personal narrative of the Second World War between the Anglo-American landings in Normandy on June 1944 and the surrender of all our enemies 14 months later. Tremendous events struck the civilized world. Nazi Germany was crushed, partitioned and occupied. Soviet Russia established herself in the heart of Western Europe. Japan was defeated. The first atomic bombs were cast. In this, as in earlier volumes, I have told the story as I knew and experienced it as Prime Minister and Minister of Defence of Great Britain. I have relied as before on the documents and speeches composed under the Daily Ordeal, in the belief that these give a truer picture of what happened at the time than could any afterthoughts. The original text was completed nearly 2 years ago. Other duties have since confined me to general supervision of the process of checking the statements of fact contained in these pages and obtaining the necessary consent to the publication of the original document. I have called this volume Triumph from Tragedy because the overwhelming victory of the Grand Alliance has failed so far to bring general peace to our anxious world. Winston Churchill, 1953. And in fact, on the very next page there is acknowledgements, in which he has to acknowledge the assistance of those who have helped with previous volumes and obviously this particular one as well. And it just lists a bunch of people who were involved in World War II as well. What I am trying to say here is that Otto English has tried to make out that Churchill wrote this to try and mythologise his own position in World War II, and actually what it looks like has actually happened is that he's tried to get as many objective facts and as many sources together as possible, and even had help from his own lieutenant generals, his own field marshals, his own air chief marshal, people that he was command of as Prime Minister during the war, and he appears to have actually sourced things correctly. So again, this doesn't actually seem like too much of a mythologising piece. This is actually better journalism than you could ever dream of doing, Otto English.
And this hugely successful version of events is the one that resonated with us. That's the one we see in films like The Darkest Hour.
Yes, amazingly, the mythology that we have accepted as the British people is the one that shows a British hero, Winston Churchill, doing heroic things in the war rooms. Yes, that is indeed the mythology that we have come together and accepted as a good mythology. It's almost like Otto English thinks that other people are idiots. No, we know that Winston Churchill was not perfect. I don't think anyone would ever claim that. But again, when a historical figure becomes mythologised, even during their lifetime, of course all you're going to focus on is the good that they did. Everyone knows that people did bad things in their lives, but we don't venerate people for that. So, you know, to you it looks like it's being ignored and therefore people don't know about it. No, people know about it, they just ignore it because we are venerating the man. Because the good he did far, far outweighs the bad. And I have no doubt that you're going to bring up the Bengali famine in this speech, so I can't wait to get to that.
That's the one where Winston goes into the underground and chats to ordinary people. That's the fake Churchill mythology.
I mean, what do you want me to say? Yeah, I can't believe that a film that came out 70 years after the events of World War II mythologise it somewhat. He started out this by saying, oh, Churchill forged this fictitious part of history, when I don't think anywhere, I highly doubt that anywhere in his 6 volumes about World War II does he try and claim that he went to the underground to talk to ordinary people and it didn't happen. I'm going to be honest here, Otto. If you can actually prove that that happened to me and that in those volumes he actually said that, I will take back absolutely everything I say in this video. But I will be shocked if Winston Churchill lied about that, because he was a decent journalist. I mean, honestly, in the same way you shouldn't get all your facts from random places on the internet, people also know that you shouldn't just get random facts about people from dramatised historical films. But I mean, I'm not expecting any honesty from Otto English at this point, so whatever, we may as well continue.
The real Churchill was not this cartoonish super politician, but a complex, paradoxical man who over the course of his very long career got a lot of things wrong.
People are aware that Dunkirk happened. I think Otto English would be hard-pressed to find anyone that said Churchill made absolutely no mistakes in his life whatsoever, let alone the war. I mean, it's a war. Of course it's messy. We didn't win it overnight. But he was quite clearly an inspiring figure to many. There is plenty of historical evidence for that. Just watch The World at War. It's a great documentary that came out in the 70s.
Back in the First World War, it was he who orchestrated the Dardanelles campaign in 1915, which was a disaster.
Yeah, a lot of people know that. Again, no one is saying that he was a perfect man. In fact, most people have many criticisms of his Gallipoli campaign. It's a well-known disaster. I don't get it. He's done the Twitter thing. He's just made a random person up and is arguing against them. No one says Churchill's perfect.
Throughout his wilderness years, he got all sorts of things wrong and was a dyed-in-the-wool imperialist who really, really committed himself to stopping Indian independence.
Prime Minister of Great Britain and man in service to his queen, who was Empress of India, didn't want Indian independence. What a shock. You know, a lot of British people at the time didn't want India to be independent either. It's quite amazing, but there's the facts. But Otto English does this disingenuous thing as well, where effectively he judges absolutely every historical figure by morals that we effectively came up with yesterday, in terms of history anyway, where imperialism, again, it was the overarching, almost seen as moral crusade for an awful lot of people in the empire, where effectively they felt like, well, we've got an empire, we have, a third of the planet under our rule, we need to civilise them. Like that was the overarching moral view of the time. And obviously now, with progressives like Otto English, it's, well, that's just evil, and Churchill was evil because he believed this, and I don't see it as evil, because effectively progressives want to do the same thing. They just can't confront that places they want to civilise are uncivilised. A great example at the moment is Hamas in Gaza. Queers for Gaza is still one of the funniest movements that I have seen in the modern day. Because if they were trying to say the same thing over in Gaza, they'd probably be thrown off rooftops. But at the same time, if they were honest with themselves, they would admit that actually they think they should effectively take over Gaza and put in the gay rights that they want for the entire world there. But they're not honest with themselves. And you can tell they're not honest with themselves because, as I keep saying, Otto English is constantly disingenuous here. I can't actually believe how disingenuous he is, but I guess it's the world we live in.
That sits at odds with our idea of Churchill as being this sort of saviour of freedom. Because yes, he believed in saving Western freedom and British freedom, but he did not extend the courtesy the people of the empire.
The empire was included in British freedom. That's why they were fighting the Japanese for Burma and India. Singapore as well, by the way, and Hong Kong. But I don't think Otto English is the type of person to actually know that there were tribes in India that partook in widow burning. I don't know what his position would be on imperialism in that case, but I would be unshocked if he were to address that properly and come away with the conclusion that we were wrong for stopping Indians from burning their widows. But as I say, he's so disingenuous, I don't think he's actually capable of discerning fact from fiction. Again, his intuition is, if something is British, it needs to be evil. If something is new and progressive, however, that's very good, or if it's foreign, it's very good. And so he discerns facts from, is this putting Britain in a good or bad light, or is this putting progressive values or foreign values in a good or bad light? So I don't know where he'd land on that.
And that's a problem.
Historical facts are a problem? There aren't people today saying that we need the empire back, at least unironically. At this point in time, people don't particularly care to take over India again. People don't particularly care to have Jamaica as a colony again. Brits just really want to be left alone, but we're not allowed to be left alone because of people like you demanding the borders stay open for what effectively comes down to ethnic revenge. You know, we colonised India, therefore they should be free to colonise us. Honestly, if we get that free trade movement with India, that is going to be a disaster. Something like 30% of Indian graduates do not have jobs in India. Of course they're going to come over here and try and get on the grad schemes. It's a no-brainer for them.
The trouble is that if you start saying these things, you upset people.
Again, also, people aren't upset that you are pointing out historical facts when they are actually historical facts. What I am making clear in this video does upset people, including me, yes, is that you will imply, I mean, for a start, the moral relativism of people in the past is really weird and just a completely inappropriate thing to do. I will always compare it to technology. You shouldn't call cavemen stupid just because they didn't invent the wheel. Like, again, morals are a bit like technology. They develop and are innovated on over time. And the best way to allow them to be innovated on and develop over time is to have a rather basic set of rules. In Britain, they used to just be, common law, but we've gone way outside the realm of that thanks to Tony Blair and the Tory government that's coming after it, and allow a level of freedom that allow cultures and norms to develop. And that's how you get differences between, the north and south of England, between Lancashire and Yorkshire, between Scots and other Scots. But for some reason, you seem to think that throughout history, everyone was wrong unless they had very specific current year morals. And that's just a stupid way of determining whether someone was good or evil in the past. Again, they were kind of innovating on whether imperialism was good or not, and generally, from the British perspective, it was definitely better than the other empires, which is absolutely what we should be comparing it to, but that's not what you do. You compare it to modern day, not even British values, progressive values, which is the worst thing you can do. Because there is no way we've been living in this experiment long enough to determine whether it's good or bad. And it was the same in those days. Imperialism of the 1900s, certainly early 1900s, was not the same imperialism as the early 1800s, and definitely was not the same imperialism as the early 1700s. As time went on, for God's sake, the British stopped slavery. That was a huge innovation of the British imperialism. Do you think ending slavery was bad, Otto English, because we were stopping local cultures from partaking in their culture? I don't think you'd say that. But then again, I think you'd say, well, British partook in the slavery, like, they set the fire, they shouldn't be rewarded for putting it out. And, well, at that point, there's no point having a conversation, because you clearly don't know anything about the history of slavery, which effectively has been a part of human society, time immemorial. We are in the weird bit of history where slavery isn't the norm.
Because people want to believe in the myth. They want to believe in that super being and not in the real story of war.
Again, it's just disingenuous. People are perfectly happy to admit the things that you have pointed out. In fact, it's common knowledge from people that I know who know about Churchill. The problem people have with you, Otto, is that you will only focus on the negative. And it's pretty obvious it's because your entire goal for doing so is to deconstruct British myths. And people don't want that. People don't want you to deconstruct British myths. You know, Churchill did good things. I mean, this is the problem. Churchill did good things, and, I mean, at least at the start you said we should all be very proud of that, but then you're saying things that, one, are already common knowledge, two, people do accept as fact anyway, and then you have a problem with that because they'll only focus on the good. Well, you tend to only focus on the good that heroes do. I don't see an issue with that.
And that leads me on to Dunkirk.
Is that seriously all you have to say about Churchill? That the bad things he did were that he was an imperialist? I mean, of course he was. He was Prime Minister of an empire.
Everybody knows the story of Dunkirk.
He does the thing again where he explains the story of Dunkirk. Everyone knows it. Let me explain it. I'm just going to skip it for you.
The 2017 Christopher Nolan film. This gave rise to the notion of Dunkirk spirit. Dunkirk spirit is the idea that British people, or specifically British passport holders, have a sort of magic DNA which enables us to overcome adversity.
That is really weird framing that he rephrased British people as British passport holders. Again, part of the national story of British soldiers, I don't know why he called them passport holders, because Dunkirk will have been pretty much 100% white British soldiers. I suppose to stay safe from Otto English pedanticness if he ever goes through this video, I'm sure there are a few non-white faces within Dunkirk's ranks. However, I don't even think that matters. This is just part of the national story. Yes, the whole point is that, you know, as the fake Churchill quote goes, if you are going through hell, keep going. It just plays off the stiff upper lip mentality that Brits had before that anyway. The whole stoicism of Britishness. Yes, you are going through an awfully bad time. There is very little chance you will survive, but you keep fighting to make that little chance grow. I don't see the issue with this.
And during the recent pandemic, it was invoked by Boris Johnson. On at least a dozen occasions, actually, government ministers invoked Dunkirk spirit.
Yes, because it is a very shorthand way of saying, stiff upper lip, keep going, we'll get through it. It's a very concrete example of where it helped.
And Johnson said that the little labs could be the little boats of our era.
Yes, and in hindsight it was cringe, but I mean, is his problem... I don't think Otto English's problem is that it made people take the pandemic even more seriously. Otto English was one of the freaks always wearing masks at all times during the pandemic. Because you gotta follow the science, bro. So it's really odd that he'd have problems with Boris Johnson invoking Dunkirk spirit at a time where, at the time, he was trying to invoke it as well.
Of course, and I'm sorry to break it to you if you are a British passport holder, of course you don't have magical DNA.
Why the hell's he saying this? Who claimed we did? The Dunkirk spirit is within the character of the British. It's not within the genetics of it, you idiot. What the hell's he talking about?
Yeah, it's a myth, and it's a myth based on a myth, because in May 1940, people did not hop in little rowing boats and go across the English Channel to rescue the British Expeditionary Force.
I never watched Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, but I have seen the trailer. I don't remember any rowing boats. Anytime I've read anything on Dunkirk, and anytime I've seen anything about Dunkirk, whether it's documentaries or, yes, docudramas as well, I don't think I've ever seen a rowing boat. I don't know what the hell he is talking about.
The Royal Navy and the Coast Guard did. And to that end, they requisitioned small boats from the south coast, often without the owner's knowledge, and they took them across to ferry the British soldiers from the shoreline to the ship.
Isn't this common knowledge? What the hell is he talking about? I love as well how he's trying to make out, oh, isn't the military evil? They just took people's boats, yeah, to save lives. I'm not being funny. A lot of people in the UK understood we were at a war. You know, people in the south aren't going to complain that the army took their ships to try and save their countrymen. You know, they're not going to care. In fact, I'm pretty sure a lot of them would have been quite thankful that they just took the initiative and commandeered it. I don't know what his point is here. I don't know anyone who thought that Dunkirk involved rowing boats. Maybe there were one or two of people trying to get from the beaches to the ships, but I don't know of anybody at all that thinks anyone rowed from Dunkirk to Britain.
This gave rise to a myth that ordinary people had done it, and it was a useful myth at the time.
I have literally never heard this myth, ever in my life. The only myth about ordinary people coming together to, you know, help with the war spirit was, you know, digging for victory, growing their own vegetables, making their own Anderson shelters in their back garden. You know, there's great moments in The World at War, seriously, watch that documentary, where people of London were talking about stories of when, you know, buildings had been blown up, and there was this one particular guy who was looking for survivors in bombed out buildings, and he managed to get in one, and there was just this old woman who was, I think, still under her bed trying to get shelter, and she was completely naked, and the man said, right, you know, I'll get you somewhere safe, but, you know, make yourself look presentable outside. And obviously, because of the shell shock, all she did was get a hat on, but was still naked because she didn't realise she was naked. So the gentleman had to help make her realise that she needed to get dressed. But that was the wartime spirit. It wasn't the idea that the average British person went on a boat over to Dunkirk. I have literally never heard of that myth in my life. And it sounds like Otto English has just made it up. And honestly, with the things he's lied about in this speech, I wouldn't be shocked if that was the case.
A useful myth because Britain felt imperiled, and the propaganda of the time encouraged people to believe that it was a David and Goliath struggle.
I mean, it quite literally was for a few months. We were literally the only Allied force as part of that war not being invaded. And then obviously we pushed them back at the Battle of Britain. And then the idiot Japanese decided to bomb Pearl Harbor, and then we finally got support from the Americans. I mean, if Nazi Germany's taking over pretty much all of Europe, I think it's fair enough to say that's David and Goliath when it comes to at least Europe. And obviously when it comes to the rest of the world, we owned most of it. But even then, you had problems with imperialist Japan. You had problems with Germany getting their claws into North Africa. You know, this is why it was World War II. But what, am I going to be told that that's a myth because, as you say, we owned most of the world? Like, it's just a complete disingenuous take on the whole myth.
Which I'm afraid to say again is absolute nonsense. Britain in 1940 had the biggest navy by far in the world.
Yes, Otto, how useful is a navy when it comes to all the landlocked countries that Germany took over? You know, the navy was helpful for getting the beaches of Normandy. You know, great. Thank God we had that, I suppose. But then you actually need to make a land war. And we were not prepared for a land war. Hence we needed American support. Come on.
It was twice the size of the German navy.
Yes, but there's one big problem as well. Germans had U-boats. We weren't very good at detecting them. It was only thanks to the code cracking team that Alan Turing was involved in that we managed to actually finally intercept messages about U-boat positions. And even then we couldn't use them properly because we didn't want the Germans to know that we knew about them. I'm serious. This is the most midwit take on the you know, we're standing alone in Europe take that I have ever seen in my life. Great, we were very good at stopping the Germans having an open navy in the waters. They still owned all of Europe.
Britain, yes, had retreated, but really this was a failure of politics and a failure of government to hold Nazi Germany to account.
Are you kidding me? You know how World War II started? Initially it was just, fine, take the German bits of the Sudetenland. I guess that's not too bad. Oh, hang on, you're looking at Poland next? Well, if you do that, we're at war. Oh, they took Poland, well, we're at war. I mean, fine, I guess they shouldn't have the Sudetenland, but you do realise that after you have the bloodiest war ever in Europe, you got to be quite keen not to have another one. Again, this is the most hindsight-privileged sentence I think I've ever heard in my life. I don't think a lot of awful steps were taken by the British at the start of World War II, I could understand the idea of appeasement. However, I am definitely on the Enoch Powell side of things in that we should absolutely have been destroying the Nazis when they got into power and when they started spreading into Europe. But again, that's probably a privilege of hindsight. But there is no way Otto English is going to praise Enoch Powell for saying we needed to go to war earlier and snuff out the Nazi menace, despite the fact he obviously agrees. I mean, thank God Otto English is just a charlatan journalist, because if he was anywhere near politics, things would be way worse than they are now.
That myth was necessary, the myth of Dunkirk in 1940, but should we really be trotting it out?
But your quote-unquote actual facts about it are completely, they're what people think anyway. I don't know where you got the rowboat thing from. I mean, even veterans of Dunkirk see the myth as basically entirely true.
Operation Dynamo was, I think, one of the main epics of the war, and I think it was certainly a turning point. Well, the few days after, I could hear quite a lot of noise, and I got up to look out the window. It was almost like magic, and the whole harbour was full of little ships, and they were manned by elderly men, boys, but at least they were able to get onto the beaches in Dunkirk and transport the soldiers onto the larger ships.
I mean, even this veteran is saying that there were one or two what sound like civilians on these ships as well. But yes, majority of them were naval officers sailing the small boats. I mean, I cannot tell you how disgusted I am at Otto English's complete and utter disingenuous and just barefaced lie in this TEDx talk. TEDx should never, ever have sponsored this absolute nonsense.
In 2024? I don't think so.
Well, that interview of an actual Dunkirk veteran was only from 6 years ago, so what's happened in the last 6 years, you idiot?
And that brings me to my final myth.
As far as I'm concerned, Dunkirk wasn't even a myth. The only false fact that you came up with was rowing boats were used, but I don't know anyone that ever believed that or even thought that was part of the story.
It's the myth that would have us believe that World War II was a sort of glorious thing.
No, I don't think that's ever been a myth. There are certainly people that glorify war, but it's never been widespread that World War II was this glorious time. People weren't particularly happy having to stay in bomb shelters while being raided in the Blitz. I don't know where you get this from.
In my childhood, way back in the 1970s when everything was black and white.
It's honestly quite embarrassing that Otto English is in his 50s, possibly pushing 60s, and is trying to act like this cool 20-year-old. Like, Otto, if you are this old and you have the mental capacity to effectively write nonsense to the standard of a relatively clever 14-year-old, that's quite embarrassing. I just want to point that out.
I loved, like a lot of boys of my age, playing soldiers.
Oh my god, are you serious? Is he trying to say that because we have Call of Duty games based in World War II, where you can't even use the word Nazi anymore, that's somehow glorifying war? Are you serious?
I had a whole cupboard full of sort of machine guns made of plastic, and I had 2 action men, a 6-inch high model and a 6-foot model in my father.
Oh my god, that is cringe. Not the guns part. I own some airsoft guns. I think having pretend guns is perfectly fine, even at the ripe old age of pushing 30. But saying I had an action man and my other action man was my dad, cringe, man.
Who had fought in the Second World War. I was an expert on War Age 10 because I'd seen Where Eagles Dare and The Great Escape, and I'd even seen Dad's Army live at the Harlow Palladium.
There are some films that don't show the true horrors of war. No one takes Where Eagles Dare as a film that accurately depicts how war is hell. I've never seen The Great Escape properly, but I have seen clips. That does a pretty good job of showing some of the horrors of being in a POW camp and trying to escape it. Again, it's not a documentary on it, but I don't expect a fictitious film to be accurate. I mean, this is as stupid as saying I watched Inglourious Bastards, and that made me think that this is what everyone thinks of World War Two. No. I also wouldn't be shocked if your dad really liked Where Eagles Dare as well, despite it not accurately showing the true horrors of war. But again, it's escapism. It's not supposed to reflect reality 100%. So I just don't be an idiot in this next part, please, I beg you.
And so when I went for walks with my dad, I would test his knowledge, just to see what he knew. And I regret to inform you that he let me down consistently, because not once in the Second World War did my dad jump barbed wire on a motorbike, dig a tunnel, or exchange witty banter with a captured German submarine captain.
Otto, when you were younger, did you have water on the brain? I mean, look, we were all young once, but it's kind of blowing my mind that you are comparing myths of World War II with what you thought World War II was like when you were 10. That is genuinely blowing my mind. Like, there aren't many people who are playing Call of Duty World War II, seeing this train scene and thinking, yes, this is exactly what happened in World War II. There is absolutely nobody on planet Earth that actually takes this as a real-life story, accurately depicting what happened. You know, it's not Battlefield 5 where they try and make out that 40 Norwegian men sabotaging a Nazi heavy water factory, I believe it was, to try and create nuclear weapons, was actually all done by a single 16-year-old Norwegian woman. You know, Battlefield 5 tried to play that off as this was a real thing. Call of Duty World War II didn't. And yet, for some reason, you are mainly focusing on when I was 10, I thought that people in World War II really drove motorbikes over barbed wires, a la Where Eagles Dare. Otto English is not a serious person.
My dad's stories were very often about running away, hiding, exchanging wine, and on one occasion, coming face to face with the enemy and fleeing for his life.
Yeah, you know, they had alternative ways to fight in World War II, I think we can say. And it's very rare that you would be the kind of easy company battalion of band of brothers, which a lot of that is a dramatisation, but it's a dramatisation of things that actually happened with Easy Company going through World War II. And there is an entire episode about an assault on a German position, and it was done so well that it is still studied to this day as to how to make a successful assault. So there were stories like that, but yeah, your average soldier probably wouldn't have seen any fighting. You know, the frontline fighting is actually a very small part of war. An awful lot of war is just waiting around and logistics. You know, it's not like the medieval times where you'd have 6,000 men on each side in a field and then you just have a massive melee, and even then, a lot of the time that would stop if enough nobles were injured. You know, it moved on to a kind of total war type thing, and especially in World War II, that kind of turned to try and terrorise the enemy civilians into submitting, which, as it turns out, didn't typically work, so we ended up firebombing Dresden instead to completely melt that junction, which worked for about 4 days. But yeah, war is hell. And an awful lot of the majority of time, it's also very boring. I mean, anyone who knows the subject is not shocked, but people who know the myths also probably realise that it's very rare that these mythological stories of, you know, people making brave assaults in houses in Soviet Russia or in France or things like that. It was quite rare that people actually did that. It was very few soldiers that got involved in it. And as Otto English is saying, it's like, oh, but don't people know most soldiers were just bored most of the time? Yeah, most people probably know that. You don't have this sort of esoteric knowledge from your father. You know, a lot of people have relatives that are in the war. A lot of their stories are probably boring.
They were stories of fear and of a young man caught up in circumstances beyond his control.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of mythology all around that as well. Journey's End would be a good one. Accrington Pals is another good one that's like that. I don't know why you think you're unique in having this esoteric knowledge. This is just common knowledge.
And that is the truth of most people's experience of World War II.
Yeah, but it's boring, so of course not many people dramatise it.
None of that generation chose to be there. And so when I see that war weaponized, whether it be Churchill, whether it be Dunkirk, whether it be anything else, I ask us to remember the truth.
It was the most predictable thing in the world that this would be the most accurate meme I've ever made. Just replace Churchill did some bad things with World War II was bad. There you go, there you have it. That's a more accurate representation of the meme. I think the thing I love most about it is that he goes from Dunkirk being one of the myths to World War II was only glorious and great being another myth. Those two myths completely conflict. Dunkirk was awful. People were trying to get out of there. People were trying to run away. That's where a big myth of the British spirit to resist comes from. It means resist to the point where you're actually safe and you will be absolutely fine. But then at the same time you're saying, oh, war's glorified a bit, isn't it? Maybe we shouldn't be glorifying it. It's like, is the Dunkirk story glorifying war? These people are trying to get away from being killed. I don't think it glorifies war exactly. I think it glorifies the heroism and quick thinking of the Navy to, as you say, commandeer vehicles to save our countrymen. Again, completely conflicting, and everything he said on Churchill, as far as I can tell, is just a lie. He either had to lie about Churchill, or he had to completely make up myths or completely misunderstand them, to the point where it was nothing but disingenuous. So there you go. I hope your IQ didn't take as much of a hit as mine did. But anyway, that's everything I had for you today. So, regional variations on Tailed Feature stream tonight. I don't think he's been arrested by the Scottish police yet, but I guess we'll find out. There is Laughing at the Guardian coming on Saturday. We will have Callum from the Lotus Eaters on, so come look forward to that as well. But in the meantime, that's everything I had for you today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.